because we are webcasting. So welcome to the Audit Committee of Friday the 11th of July. Any apologies for absence?
I've received no apologies, Chair.
I'm sure the Vice Chairman is on his way. Moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations relevant to the agenda? I see no one indicating. So thank you very much. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 10. Are there any points that anybody wanted to raise from the meeting, from the minutes? No, I thought they were a true and fair record, and so agreed. Thank you very much. And we move on to item number 4, the Internal Audit Annual Report 24-25, and this includes the opinion. Chris, would you like to give us an introduction?
Thank you, Chair. So, Internal Audit are required to present an annual opinion on the Council's framework of internal control, governance and risk management, which feeds into the annual governance statement. We're required to explain how those conclusions have been reached and the basis for them, and to confirm annually the extent to which we comply with internal audit standards. The full annual report is shown at Appendix A. It's a positive reflection on the Council. We're providing a reasonable level of assurance for 2024-25, which is the second of 4 grades. All of the graded audit assignments resulted in either substantial or reasonable level of assurance. Those in particular that were on the financial systems which underpin the Council's accounts, I'm pleased to say, all had a substantial level of assurance attached to them. The appendix shows the results of each audit and an executive summary for each one. And many of those results were reported back during the course of the year through the progress reporting that we do. In terms of service performance, we set new key performance indicators for the year, as members will be aware. We were behind in the first half of the year, but we ended up with just under 92% delivery, and that was 231 days against 160 in the previous year. And I can say that for this year, we are on track. There will be a progress report to the next meeting, but we are actually ahead of schedule at the moment for 2025-26. The staffing's stable, and we're about to end our reliance on agency contracts at the end of this month for the current year. We achieved our productivity target. We reached 81%. That compares with 66% at the end of last year. And the Council has a good record of implementing the recommendations that arise from our audits, with all of the medium and high risk ones that we followed up having shown to be implemented on time. Customer satisfaction has been good. 100% from individual surveys and 92% from the senior stakeholder survey. But we're not perfect, and we're moving to improve further this year. Our productivity target has been increased to 85% for this year, and we are on track to achieve that. And the two things go hand in hand. So raising the productivity will mean that we're more likely to deliver your chargeable days. So we're on track with that. Other continuous improvement activity that we've done during the year has included skills reviews for the auditors with personal development plans. We now evaluate the risk of fraud on every audit, and we've also developed the audit universe that came to the last meeting, and that's improved the audit planning process. All members of the team have also recently attended environmental sustainability audit training, and we've appointed a team champion who is going to lead on our audit work in that area. Section 4 within the appendix covers quality assurance and compliance with the standards. And as previously reported, the EQA, external quality assessment, was carried out. The results came to the committee in November, and they showed that we're in general conformance with the standards, and a new quality assurance policy was endorsed by the committee, and I can confirm we're operating in conformance to those standards. I'm required to also confirm organisational independence and explain how we demonstrate that, and that's covered within section 5 of Appendix 1. Moving forward into 25, well, in the year we're already in, but 25-26 there are new global internal audit standards which apply, and they replace the previous public sector internal audit standards. They're not massively different, but we have reviewed them. We're already mostly in compliance, but paragraph 4.8 in Appendix 1 details some further actions that we plan for later on this year. The main ones are a internal audit strategy document, which will set out for what we are planned for the next 3 years, and a new updated internal audit charter, which will come for your approval. As I say, both documents will come here for member review and approval later this year. But members are asked to note the report, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I mean, one of the things I was just going to say is, compared with previous internal audit reports that this committee has considered, I do think you're starting to make a real sort of step change in this. And I was very taken with paragraph 7, which off the top of my head, I think is your bit about continuous improvement and doing skills audits, and a lot of that sort of work, which I don't think has ever been evident to the committee before. And likewise, you know, the organisational independence statement, I think is very helpful. And strangely, I don't remember that before either. But, I mean, those are the only 2 points really from me, and I'm not sure they need a great response from you. I'm going to go to the committee first, and then I'll come to Emma.
Thank you.
You're a long way away.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Welcome.
I just
Karen.
wanted to pick up on the Appendix 1 item on street cleaning performance and contract management. I note that in the text you're saying that it needs to have performance management arrangement. And I know I'm not supposed to talk about service levels, but the service levels are not available at the moment, partial, but I know from a point of view of rural village cleansing, it seems like a half service is the best that's being managed at the moment. So performance management might clarify that more for people, because most of the villages don't even realise their entitlement.
I mean, from my point of view, I think you make a reasonable point. I think that you will find there has been a change to the service recently, but I mean, of course, that's slightly outside the premise of the audit. So, yeah, I buy your point, but the scope of the review was really to do with contractual arrangements, the monitoring performance and risk, the compliance with statutory requirements, environmental promises and commitment, and business continuity. So your point, in effect, is
My point is that
one
at
of
the moment,
you should have reviewed
with a
service
recent
delivery.
example, it was, although they're supposed to be 4 a year, I think 2 was most likely. And yes, I'm quite sure they'll do their best to sort it out, but it's not the service that was originally contracted for.
I don't know whether Emma wants to say. So I come to you next.
Yeah, one of my questions did actually relate to that, but from a service perspective, they are in the villages now, and we have a picture to show to prove that. So please, if your village hasn't been, I apologise, Chairman, this is in connection with the service, but if your village hasn't been done, please let me know and I'll make sure that it is.
Well, I've been in touch with Tim Lewis, and I've got considerable faith in him, and he's doing his best. But
Okay.
I don't think the contractor has the staffing that is
Well,
enabled him to do the job.
Inevitably, do you want to come to me now for my question? Yeah. My question does actually relate to a similar part on the book. I do have two questions. But the one, it says, there was also, this is in the same connection with the page 31, which is the street cleaning. It says, there was also scope to implement more robust monthly monitoring of outstanding cases. Is that from a Wychavon perspective or a contractor perspective? Where is the robustness coming from, please? And then I do have another question. Thank you.
Sorry, apologies. I think it's both really, because it's not every case. I think that they're not recorded as complaints, they're cases, aren't they? Every case is different, but what we did find that there were examples of cases which have been open for a long time, and that was why we recommended that monthly monitoring be undertaken, so that you can pick up on, and it, you know, wherever the line of responsibility is, that it's still important to pick up on actually addressing that, and having that monthly monitoring, we feel would support that.
Is that in place now as part of your audit?
It wasn't in place at the time of the audit, so we made the recommendation. Our process is, and I can't remember the date that was agreed, but there would have been a date from which that action would be in place. What we do as a matter of course is once that date comes up to being due, we follow up. So we do a follow-up review with the officers to check, and they have to provide evidence to show that it's been implemented. But I don't know whether that's actually happened yet.
From your point of view, of course, your closing date was the 25th of March, and therefore we are looking backwards. Hopefully, of course, we've improved the service standards. And can I just reassure Councillor Tucker that, funnily enough, I saw the street cleaning chap lorry only yesterday in Breedon's Hardwick, so there we go.
Sorry, so one of the real question, or the second question, were actually related to the operational areas, the strategic risks, and within there were three that belonged to two that were belonged to reasonable for governance and ethics. Now, we sort of mentioned the fact that you're applying training. Is this compliance, or the constitutional compliance, is that for councillors or for staff? Because we've now just started the member development steering group, which obviously covers training and meeting the peer review recommendations. And I didn't know whether that forms part of the governance that you're referring to here.
Thank you. I think the first thing to say is that when you have a constitution compliance review and we're talking about ethical governance, there's a whole raft of areas that you can potentially look at. So this particular audit was focused on the joint working arrangements with Worcestershire Regulatory Services, the quality of supporting documents and assessments used to inform decisions, and the code of conduct for members and officers. So in terms of code of conduct, we did look at both members and officers, but there's obviously an awful lot more in the Constitution than the areas that we specifically looked at, and we could obviously look at other areas in the future.
Any other points from members of the committee? Great.
Yes, Chairman, thanks. Just a bit of concern when I read in the business continuity and emergency planning section, where it talked about a third of the business services continuity plans had not been approved. And then the people that are supposed to be implementing the plans, there were gaps in the documents, and it specifies their responsibilities as well, which is a bit concerning. So presumably you follow that up as recommendations going through, but just to read it cold like that on the emergency planning and continuity section.
Short answer is yes, we'll follow up to gain assurance that the actions have been implemented. There was some positive practice in terms of the recent exercising that's been done by finance and IT. And if you're auditing by the textbook, you should say, well, we should do that anyway. But actually, I've never actually seen it being done. I've never actually seen a council that gets as far as testing its business continuity plans. So although it's reasonable assurance, and I absolutely agree that these actions need to be undertaken and we will follow up and give that assurance, but actually you are above other councils.
Just one other point as well, which I think we will probably agree. For a number of staff, the information is in their heads and they don't often put it down on paper. And I think one of the things we're trying to ensure that they do know is that they need to log, particularly things like contact details, supplier details, who needs to go where, because they could think, well, I know who to go and speak to, I know who does that. So we just need to make sure that it's not just in their minds, it's actually down on the paper as well. I think we're fine, don't we, Chris?
Sorry, I have a question regarding the benefits section. It's more of a principle of who decides what's a reasonable level and what's a substantial level. Is it an art form, or is there a set of empirical formula? And the reason I'm saying that is because I've read the benefits one, and I don't feel substantially assured by reading it. And therefore, I just wondered what the thing was. I mean, there's a lot of people not had DBS checks. There's quite a few sort of fundamental issues there, and I just wondered how that can be substantially reassuring.
Yeah. To directly answer the question, me. So
Right,
I take the decision. But I think it's important to recognise substantial assurance doesn't mean full assurance. And the service used to provide full assurance. So the top grade used to be full assurance, and I don't believe that's possible, because full assurance implies that it's 100%. If you say you've got a full glass, it's right full up to the brim. So within that grade of substantial assurance, it doesn't imply that there has to be no findings or recommendations. But it was my judgment when I reviewed the file, and there would have been a dialogue between myself and the auditor that did the work, to gain a sense of just how serious is this particular issue. But what I would say is if you've read the summary and have reached a different conclusion, then that probably means that I haven't worded it as well as it could have been worded, because you've reached a different conclusion to the one that I've reached. So I'll take that forward as a point for myself. But yeah, that was a judgment, and it is a judgment. It's not scientific. It's not based on a number of recommendations of a certain level. But what I would say is that if you have any particularly serious recommendations, then obviously the conclusion wouldn't be substantial assurance.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to be picky. I just wanted to get an idea of how it was working.
I mean, just on the benefits question, of course, I mean, it is hosted by Malvern Hills. And I suppose the thought that occurs to me is there any difference, is there any gap between the host and ourselves as almost the client? I mean, we're not, it's a partnership, but...
If I can, Chair, no, there's no gap. The team, whilst they're hosted by Malvern, they based here, and we have our management board meetings. We've got a really good relationship. It isn't really a client contractor. It is a shared service partnership with Worcester City as well.
Just referring to paragraph 4.7 of the report, in respect of the new global internal audit standards which apply for 2025-2026 financial year onwards, referring to ethics and professionalism. In terms of ethics in particular, has there been any variation in those standards or requirements as against previous requirements?
Short answer is no, nothing significant. Though the requirements existed already in relation to ethics and professionalism before.
Right.
They've just been rolled into what are now globalised standards rather than public
And
sector specific standards.
4.8, the assurance by September 2025. 3 points in respect of that. Firstly, what practical steps are being taken to ensure that the members of the team are reminded of those requirements of the Code of Ethics? Secondly, is there any training in respect of that? And thirdly, is there any testing in respect to that?
Okay, so the question of the Code of Ethics will be covered in a team meeting that we'll have in September, and the training element that goes in that, which is really, it's quite instructional, but that will come from myself to the entire team in September. The other query,
The third point was the testing of that.
the testing of it. Testing really ultimately comes down to the external quality assessment review process. So we have, basically, the auditors are audited periodically. And we had ours, appreciate you weren't a member at that time, but we had one carried out in 2024-25, and that covered all of the areas of the public sector standards. So behind the scenes, obviously, we've got an awful lot of documentation and processes in place, which will demonstrate, that have intended to demonstrate compliance with those standards, and an independent external person came in and evaluated us against those standards, and was happy with our arrangements in terms of ethics and professionalism.
Yeah, but I suppose the point is not so much the policies, but in terms of checking understanding of those principles, because in an audit that might look in to see whether or not those ethics and those principles have been set out, and perhaps through audit determining whether or not they've been complied, but that could potentially be preempted, or difficulties be preempted, if there's a testing to check people's understanding of those. Because it's one thing to be reminded and perhaps to receive training, but to test that, because to know that they would be implemented, rather than those things, any failures in that being picked up later on through an audit, that could be perhaps prevented by a testing of understanding.
Yeah, I think if I can just explain the approach that I would take to any training event is to ask questions as well as instructing. So whilst I haven't developed the slides and the training itself, there would be questioning in there, and I'd normally start by asking, you know, what is your perception and understanding of what internal audit ethics is all about, professionalism is all about. Now, it's not a kind of bolt on or once a year or once every 5 years or anything like that, because it's built into throughout our quality assurance processes. So, and if I can explain as an example, if I was reviewing an audit file and I thought there was a finding and a recommendation which didn't imply impartiality, because that can and does occasionally happen, then part of my role is to pick that up at that point and address it with the auditor and say, no, you know, you shouldn't, we can't comment on matters of that nature. That's a policy matter, for example. So I appreciate this isn't, I'm not giving a black and white answer, but it's something that's built into the day-to-day job rather than an annual or biannual or whatever exercise that we undertake. But because this is specifically being covered in these new it's in the new global standards. When I saw them, whilst they're not particularly different to the public sector standards, I felt that there was an opportunity to reinforce these with the team, in addition to our business as usual, how we do things, to just so that we could demonstrate absolutely compliance with the standards.
Yeah, I understand. I suppose a final point is there the potential for looking into ways of testing understanding? Because I know in the public sector where these points are very important, quite often in the training there is a way of checking it through questions that people have to answer individually in order to have complied with the training to check understanding on an individual basis.
Can I just pick on it, because I think there's an important point here as well in relation to professional qualifications and professionalism. So when you I'll give an example. I'm a chartered accountant, so there's certain standards that I'm expected to uphold, and that was absolutely drilled into me as part of my studying and training for the qualification. It's very much a theme through that. Within the team, we also have a member of staff who is also fully professionally qualified and will have had to have demonstrated due proficiency in that area as part of the qualification. We also have a member of the team that's studying for AAT, and we have 2 other members of staff who are doing Institute of Internal Audit qualifications, and as part of those qualifications it will be drilled into those as well. But as part of maintaining your ongoing status, you have to maintain your own continuing professional development, and that's irrespective of the role that you undertake. You have to continue to do that. So really you demonstrate it in a whole host of different ways, but I'll take on board the comment that you've made around testing it, and I'll give some thought to how we can whether there's anything more that we can do in that area.
Yeah, because finally, I don't doubt what you say at all. It's just that within the team, there's people with different levels of training, experience and expertise, and with different levels of qualification. Professionalism isn't a doubt, and having those qualifications. It's just the ethical aspect to ensure that that is complied with in respect of all members of the team, no matter what they're. But I'm grateful for your assurance in that regard, so thank you.
That's quite all right. Can I also add that everything is quality assured? So an audit brief is subject to 2 reviews before it goes out to a client. A work programme which follows on from the brief, which says what areas you're going to examine, how are you going to examine them. That's subject to review before any testing is undertaken. The field work is reviewed, so every working paper is read and reviewed and signed off, and the draft report is subject to a robust QA challenge as well. So in addition to what I've said around ethics and professionalism, there is that quality assurance policy framework in place as well.
I see nobody else is indicating. The question of ethics is it's a bit of a tricky minefield, really, because I always expect the officers to behave ethically at all times, and it should be just mainstream practice against the 7 standards of service in public life. If anybody's worked out how to test that, I don't know, other than the police, I suppose, at some juncture. Anyway, that's a flippant comment from me. So if we can duly note the internal audit report, and thank you very much, Chris, because I do think the internal audit report has improved, and thank you very much indeed for your efforts over the course of the year. Are we all agreed? Duly noted. Thank you. So I move on to item 5, the Treasury Management Outturn. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. And just to mention, Alice Mason has passed on her apologies for the meeting. So the report was presented to Executive Board on Wednesday, and it's the Treasury Management Outturn report, just to explain to members how we've ended up at the end of 24-25 for the investments that we have, which currently stand at just over 100 million, which is very good news for the funding for the authority. We have 0.4 full-time equivalents investing all of the funds, so I think from the finance team's point of view, we've got a trainee as well now, Josh, who's very involved in the support of the investment portfolio, which is really good. We're now looking at locking in some longer term loans just to ensure that we can get as high a yield as possible, and that's generally with the local authorities. I've noticed over the last couple of weeks there's quite a lot come through, because what happens is Steve / Josh will work those through with our advisors, and then they have to have that confirmation from Alice and myself, who do lots of research on the councils to decide whether we think they are a safe bet for us. That's what we tend to do. Of course, we've got the individual banks and building societies that we have, but local authorities we can tend to use our discretion. At 3.6, it talks about the investment income that's been generated. It's actually 6.2 million when you include the CCLA funds, which are sort of in the bottom of the block in 3.7. So again, it's just excellent news in terms of the funding that the authority can get through. A lot of that is on the back of the investments that we've made from the Waitrose supermarket in Droitwich and Evesham, also the health centre. You can see the lease income just shy of £2 million for those as well. So we're getting the 7% rate of return. I'm not sure there's very much more detail, Chair. As members can see, the performance indicators are there. I suppose the only last one is on page 41, just to show the spread. What we try to do is spread as much as possible. All the eggs don't go in one basket, just to demonstrate where we're looking to share the funding and share the allocations across. And clearly some have got higher levels than others. Generally it's up to the 10 million. Just take any questions, or potentially come back and say I may have to ask Alice, Chair.
Questions or comments on Treasury Management? I mean, I have one slightly tedious one, which is I was unsure as to, in the value of our CCLA investments, whether you included the dividends that they'd paid us in the value. I take it not. Yeah, no, I mean, I take it that you didn't include income in the value, and that's expressed separately. But I don't know why that somebody thought came to me. Yeah. And other than that, I mean, I thought it was quite interesting. We seem to be lending a lot to Scottish authorities at the moment.
Yeah, I thought that as well.
I wondered, I thought, oh, how odd. But I know it does sort of flow. And
on that point, Chair, it's exactly the same question that Alice and I have spoken to Steve and Josh about, and we have been very thorough in terms of all those authorities, but it seems to be that they're the ones that can pay the high yield at the moment.
Couldn't possibly comment, but in regard to the fund that you've just mentioned, the I have to get it right, CLA fund, the property fund, and the cautious multi-asset fund, which I do like that title. Immediately I picked up on the difference in the investment value and the dividends per annum and the quarterly yield. And so I actually queried that with Steve, and I had a particularly good conversation with him in connection with that, and how the investment value will actually return to a full investment value. It's just we wouldn't ask for it to be returned unless it had reached its maturity or investment value. So that was quite interesting, but all the time we do get quarterly dividends, which is above and over what we're expecting, but there's no, other than the figures identified in 24-25, there's no mechanism to see that the dividends separately. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask whether or not it's deliberate that we are loaning so much to other councils at a time of considerable change, and they disappear. It's a very substantial amount of money we're lending to councils, some of whom presumably want to borrow it because they're in difficulties.
If I can, through you, Chair, not always that they're in difficulties. It may just be that they don't want to use the Public Works Loans Board, they want to use us, because we're in a very privileged position in terms of not borrowing. A lot of councils, even financially strong councils, still borrow because they feel that that's the best way to manage some of their projects. What we've done is ensure that the maturity dates, we won't go anywhere near 2028 at the moment, and you can see the maturity dates are generally around 25. The furthest one we've got is, well, that's not a local authority, I was just looking. County Council, we've got December 27. But we would always look at what that authority is doing, and as you've just said, the ones in difficulty, we have said over the last probably month or so, no, we're not comfortable with that authority, we need to go to a different one, and Josh and Steve would not invest unless Alice and I have said that that's the right council to go for.
I mean, are we sometimes loaning to councils because we're fellow councils, or are we loaning to the best places, I suppose is what I'm asking.
Always the best places. So the good rates, there's a lot of authorities will offer good rates, so the best places, but one of our key guidelines is around, yes, the maximising the income, but more importantly, assessing that risk. And we always know with the local authority it will be safer to lend to a local authority.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually look at the spread of councils, of course, there is quite a number there that are not going to be reorganised. So Moray, North Ayrshire, South Ayrshire, North Tyneside, Basildon and Central Bedfordshire are already unitaries. It's only the three counties that we lend to. And then against that, of course, we've also got the loans that we are making to banks. I know nothing about the Al Rayan, but I do know a bit about Landesbank, and NatWest Markets is, I was going to say, no longer actually lending to the government in disguise. So that's good news. But I've never had the feeling that we'd recklessly chase rates, because, you know, we could certainly get a stronger or more speculative rate if we were willing to lower down to Bs, I would suggest, that we lent to, but I don't think that would be in our interest. Indeed. So we move on to the external audit plan. Thank you very much, Karen, for coming. I don't know why I wasn't expecting you, but there we go.
Thank you, and apologies.
So would you
for
like
being
to...
late, Chair.
No, it's perfectly reasonable to be late, like the Vice Chairman was, so that's fine.
You're from Scotland.
Yeah, you've come further, yeah. Would you like to make some introductory comments as to where you are?
Of course, thank you, Chair. So in front of you today, you've got our 24-25 external audit plan. So we're backward looking rather than forward looking, unlike internal audit. The plan is slightly different to what you would normally expect. There's, I'm going to say, two parts to it this year. There's the plan for delivering the 24-25 audit, but we also have at the back of the plan an indicative plan on how we propose building back the assurance over the periods which you've had disclaimed audit opinions for. So I'm going to start with the 24-25 plan first of all. And again, that could be broken down into two distinct areas as well. So we audit your annual accounts, but we also provide an opinion, a value for money opinion on the activity that the council has done over the year. In terms of the annual accounts audit, as I say, it sets out our strategy within the plan, and the areas that I'd like to bring to your attention are the identified risks that we've picked up through the planning stage. So there are, I'm going to say 3 risks included in the plan that are typical of any public sector organisation, and they are management override of controls, revenue recognition and expenditure recognition. We have the opportunity for expenditure recognition and revenue recognition to rebut those risks. They're not, while they're mandated, we can rebut them, and that is what we've done for this council, given the nature of the expenditure of the council and the income streams of the council. That doesn't mean that we will not do any work on those areas. We still test those areas, but we haven't identified them as significant risk areas to our audit. There are also risks included within the plan that you may typically see in other council audits, but they are risks that we've identified for this council. And that includes the valuation of your property, plant and equipment portfolio, the assumptions that lead to either a pension asset or a pension liability in your accounts. And there is a new one there this year for the implementation of IFRS 16, which is to do with leases. And it's a shift from the previous accounting standard that was applied in that where you have leases, they would be brought on as an asset onto your balance sheet. That said, we've identified it as a risk to this council, but we have been doing work with Alice and her team, and we don't think actually it's going to materialise as a risk. The only risk that we have for this council is making sure that all the transactions have been considered and it is a complete disclosure in your annual accounts rather than the actual figures that you will see in your annual accounts, if that makes sense. The other part of the plan, we do cover our independence and we do include the audit fee. We also include commentary at this stage on our value for money risk assessment, and at this stage we haven't identified any risk areas that we would like to look at in more detail during the fieldwork phase. I do caveat that with that we always say that planning is a continuous process. We continue to review those areas, and if any other risks are identified during that process, we will report back to the committee. The other section of the plan is to do with rebuild and assurance and how we take the council to a position where they are receiving unqualified opinions. And it is going to take time. And the plan that we have built into this plan, the indicative plan, is based on guidance that we've received that we've been part of, but it is also contingent on capacity from an external audit perspective, but equally capacity from a council perspective. And also, I'm going to say the council's appetite for how quickly they want to rebuild back that assurance. What the guidance that we have does not do, it doesn't take account of local government reorganisation. So that is another factor that does need to be taken into, in particular for this council. The indicative plan is based on, we've set it up into 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 being the delivery of an annual audit, so your delivery of your 24-25 annual audit. Phase 2 takes account of areas where we will need to do additional work to build back assurance over the opening balances, and that includes, for example, PPE transactions, your additions, disposals, anything that's happened during the period since you last had an unqualified opinion. It also includes pensions. So the overarching approach that all auditors are taking is that one option to build back assurance is carry out the audits for the years that you don't have the unqualified opinion. But everyone is in agreement that that would be very costly, and there is no capacity in the system to do that from either the external audit side, the council side. Even though the council has produced the accounts, we would still be coming in and asking for resources and working papers, things like that. So the approach that has been taken is to develop almost a risk assessment approach, and it will require us to perform a risk assessment and determine what areas and what balances do we need to look at to actually build back that assurance. One of those areas is pensions. So the automatic question would be, well, why can you not look at the pensions going back to the unqualified opinion? For this council, and actually all the councils within this area that participate in that particular pension scheme, there is a triennial valuation. So once every 3 years, the pension fund has a full valuation, and it sets your contribution rates for the next 3 years. That is due to happen in 25-26. So rather than actually investing and working back, we're going to take the opportunity to wait until that valuation has almost reset and given us that assurance over those balances. The final part is around about what we've deemed to be phase 3, and it's the most challenging and probably going to be the most resource intensive, is around about the reserves. And it's obtaining the assurance over the reserves. And the challenge that we all have is that the reserves are built up of your income and expenditure transactions over a number of years, and you've had disclaimed opinions, and we have no assurance over those. So there has been a group put together that has been considering what would be acceptable across the audit profession, and in particular from a regulator perspective, what would be an acceptable approach that is still compliant with our auditing standards to allow us not to have to test every single year. And a publication has now come out, which came out in June, which has been agreed by all those parties. And that is what we're going to use as the basis for developing the phase 3 approach. It will not happen in 24-25, and a key thing to take away is that in order for us to get to a position where we could potentially give an unqualified opinion, we need 3 balance sheets. So the earliest we think, given the pension side in particular, the earliest position we think we could get to for that first balance sheet would be the 31st of March 2026. Then we would carry out a further 2 audits. So the earliest we could potentially get to a clean balance sheet is the 31st of March 2028. And just in time, however, it's in time, but it's not really in time, because that's the 31st of March 2028. We would be coming in to audit that after this council potentially no longer exists. But that is the earliest we could do that, and I suppose it's the council's appetite on how much they want to invest in that, because it will come at a cost, and it will come as in terms of making sure that we have the capacity, but equally management have the capacity to do that work on top of an annual audit as well. I'm going to leave that there because I'm pretty sure lots of people will have lots of questions, and it's quite difficult to digest in the first instance as well.
Yeah, okay, well, just to start this going, I mean, thanks, Karen, for that. I mean, the bit that I just want to revisit with you was, even if the council made a decision to try and move this forward, say a year, you're doubtful that you have the capacity, and the internal would, even if we made a decision to try and throw extra resources at it. Partly because, well, I mean, the question of the leases, I think, is pretty well done. The bit that I understand you're going to struggle with is the closing cash balances for the years, because Ernst & Young let us down absolutely hopelessly with that. Then the triennial valuation of the pension fund will be finalised this September. So I sort of think we might be able to have some quick wins out of this. Because I looked at your timetable, and I frankly I was fairly, I think, surprised would be the phrase. But I do understand this business of building back insurance is very difficult for you.
Yeah, and it's capacity, but equally it's the need that we have to have 3 balance sheets as well. So the reason we need to have 3 balance sheets is because we need to have assurance over closing balances, opening balances, in-year transactions, but also comparators. And the only way that you can arrive at that is by having that 3 years worth of balance sheets. So unfortunately, the plan sets out the quickest route to recovery.
Yeah, I think, Chair, absolutely agree with Karen in terms of what we'd have to do. But I think for me, the other thing is if we had throw additional resources at it, it's additional cost. And I'm not quite sure I really worked through in my head what the value would be, what the added value would be of having that a year early. I'd be very happy. I'd be quite happy because I'd actually have a year of accounts that weren't disclaimed. But I'm not sure from a financial point of view as well, the cost, because trying to get the resource in while Alice and the team are trying to do budgets, etc., and LGR work, and trying to train people to look at some of the work the auditors would need. I'm just not sure what the value would be, but
Just a bit of devil's advocate, really. I understand that from a professional and personal thing, you really want to get these accounts looking tidy and disclaimed. But is there any real benefit, considering we're going to be forcibly decimated by the time we get there? Are we getting hung up on this and wasting money on it? I'm more devil's advocate than anything else.
Because we're going anyway. Well, that's a slightly political answer, I suspect, is needed there. But and I'm still extremely dubious that this is going to run to the government's timetable, let's put it like that. My own instinct is, as Wychavon, we would want to hand over a tidy ship.
I'm sure we'll do that anyway.
Yeah, but so that the new authority didn't have to deal with the issues that we have been struggling to deal with because of the failure of EY. But
the other point is, other than, I think, where did your mum's go? No, Wyforest. Other than Wyforest, everybody else is in the same position. So unless they do the same and throw resources at it, one of the 5 or 6 would still be in a position where the accounts wouldn't necessarily be able to scratch. And I agree with Councillor with the Vice Chair, I agree with you that we'd be handing over as clean a ship as we possibly can anyway.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's just really more of a personal opinion to say that I've been here for 2 years now, and there's been no big issues with the council. There's nothing I'm really concerned about that I think this would help with in any sort of way. So I just completely agree with Councillor Dorks that this would just be a massive amount of money for no real benefit, to be honest. I can't see the point of it. And that's about it, really. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not sure who can answer this, but if one or more of the potential unitary authority councils have got disclaimed accounts, presumably that means that we will then have to go through probably 3 more balance sheets or more for the whole unitary. Yes?
Yeah, no, that would be the case.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So that then just would be the 8 years,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? Okay. Well, that's a new world record for me. I used to chair an organisation that didn't have its accounts approved for 7 years, so that's good. Emma, do you want to make a point?
Yes, it's purely a technical point, really, regarding going back over the years to reassess the opening and closing balances. Once you've done it for that year, you can carry it forward. You don't have to go back. So why have you got to retest it for a further 3 years? Because once you've gone back and you've corrected it and you know that they're correct, you can only build on it, and you're doing a full audit each and every year thereafter. So what is the point of going backwards over figures that you've already substantiated and created a balance sheet of brought forwards and comparables? Or am I missing the plot completely?
So we are currently in a position that we don't have any assurance over those closing balances at all at the moment, because you've received a disclaimed opinion for the last 3 years now, 4 years. So it's only at the point that we start to complete your annual audits that we will start to have that assurance, and we can carry that forward into the next year. So we can accrete that information.
Previous auditors leave you then if they didn't leave you a closing balance?
Nothing.
They left one, but it wasn't accurate. There is a closing balance in the accounts, but it's
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
So it's not been audited. So they basically said that they've disclaimed the whole set of accounts.
Because then, because they disclaimed, they didn't produce 23-24 off the top of my head. In effect, you have to create a foundation in which you can progress for the 3 years. And that's the difficult part, because there is nothing to build on. That's in effect what it is. So you have to start from scratch. Every time this committee meets, I curse EY to kingdom come, to be honest. And I was toying with the idea that the committee should try and make a recommendation that any extra resources, we build EY for and so on them in court. But I'm not sure that that's going to work, because Jane's got that face again. So good. Okay, well, Karen, thank you very much. I mean, from our point of view, we didn't want to be in Murphy's Bar, but Murphy's Bar is where we are, as an ex-MD of mine used to say. I mean, EY, the damage that EY, by their complete and utter failure, continues to ripple on. I mean, do we have any comments? I mean, we have been rather dealing with the past and the fallout of that. I mean, looking at your plan, I mean, I think it makes sense to me. And I see the series of steps that you're going to go through. And so we will be in a position, just as we turn the lights off and all depart, that we would still be waiting for one more year, of course, when I reflect upon it. So then the new unitary authority, and I think you made a very good point, Jen, and not one that I had considered, because with 5 other partners, the only one who's got their accounts up to date, and lucky old Wire Forest, I suppose, there is actually no point in it, because we're still not, the new unitary or the 2 unitaries, it doesn't actually produce any position, it doesn't improve their position in any shape or form. So my suggestion to the committee is that we approve the audit plan as you've laid out, and I'm afraid to say it is not going to be satisfactory, and as you've said, one or two irresponsible people, in my view, have been Googling the word disclaimed and drawing rather strange conclusions from it, because there has been some public interest in the fact that the accounts are disclaimed. But I don't see as a committee, or indeed you as a cabinet member or you as our auditors, I do not see how we can reassure the public any more than we are, that we have the money, we have the balances, we just haven't got it audited and signed off.
Not a real thought, but given that EY failed to deliver the contract, and I understand has still been charging us, even though slightly less than they wanted, don't we have a case against them that we are still damaged by their failure?
Yeah, as much as I can respond, the public sector audits and accounts, the PSAA, have been very clear, as have the government now they've intervened, that the payments that have been due, which we paid out last year to EY and other councils up and down the country, other auditors, are valid because they allegedly did a certain piece of work, and therefore we really haven't got anywhere else to go other than work with assets. I think that's probably where I think, Karen, that's probably what you know as well. So I don't think we've got a particular case that we can move forward with.
Presumably there is a statement that could be put together that shows why we are in the position that we are, which is not related to our own actions. And that should be public before people make up different stories.
My opinion is whether that could actually be incorporated in the auditor's opinion, because that's where people have got a little bit excited. They've identified the word disclaimed and thought, oh goodness, that's really, really bad. What they haven't understood is obviously the backstop dates and how the process going forward. I didn't realise that we hadn't got a process going backwards either. That's where I'd missed out. However, I do think there needs to be something that's not in auditor speak, to be quite honest. I mean, we read this, we understand it, we understand the word difference between disclaimed and modified, we understand the difference of significant and reasonable, but a lot of people may not understand that. It does come down to the fact that this is an incredibly political issue that is being used against us, not by sensible and constituted parties, but sort of populist parties that really don't understand, to the point where I've actually considered we do offer a risk and on your financial, in any report we provide risks to the council in any report. And to be quite honest, I'm actually going to say that the competency of a councillor is a risk, and because we're actually seeing that in neighbouring authorities, that that's significant financial burden that they're applying. However, I won't go down that particular route, but I do think this is being used against us and has got no right to be at all. We do find ourselves in this situation, and we do need to correct it in a language that people can understand it. Thank you.
I'd just like to follow on from that, because I think I agree that it could be a bit more plain language around helping people to understand what's happened. But I think in my experience, certain parties, no matter how plain and no matter how much time and effort you put into trying to explain the situation, they do not take it on board. They're not interested in taking it on board. It is pure political, and it's sometimes been used quite nastily. And I think sometimes when it's aimed, it's not the party politics that gets on my wick sometimes. It's when it's aimed at officers who spend a lot of time and energy in doing their job really well and professional, and some people still want to use that stick to try and beat it on a political sense. So yes, okay, you can try your best to sort of make it as plain as simple, but I think we also have to just understand that some people won't take it on board, and we just as a committee maybe have to just stand up against that and just say it's not fair, not right what has been levelled at this council. That's it. Thank you.
Haven't you got to be careful as to how you go about explaining these things? Because if the view has been taken that the institution that has done the work has been properly paid or should be paid, there are potential issues, legal issues, one would have thought, that arise if you try to unravel that or set that aside or pass comment on it. Isn't it something that should be dealt with perhaps by professionals rather than by laypersons? Because at the end of the day, we're dealing with contract for services, whether or not that contract has been complied with. And so therefore, are we in a position to pass judgment on the compliance of that contract?
Yeah. We should be careful what we say about EY, because we have in fact paid them, and therefore they could take umbrage and possibly issue with us over what we have said. I mean, I'm always slightly surprised that the public sector, the PLSA, did not take a class action against the other firms that failed, and went along with. But I suspect that they did take some advice, and I suspect that they've decided it was Jardine versus Jardine, probably, if I remember my Dickens correctly, where, you know, at the end of it all, we probably weren't going to get a lot out of it, and we were better just to pursue, because to proceed forwards. But I think that's an interesting point that you make, and one we ought to be cognizant. Thank you very much. I think your plan is sound, and we haven't come up with an alternative, so thanks very much. That's duly noted. I mean, just on the PR, Emma, I think you and Jane need to possibly get something together, and I buy the bit that isn't in audit speak. You need a sort of statement of reassurance, or I don't know quite what. That isn't, you see, that's too jargony.
The books are all right, though,
yeah.
Apologies, because I will still speak in auditor speak, because it's very, very difficult not to, and it is very difficult to try and explain this, not only to a lay person, but equally, even actually our profession. It's taken us quite a lot of time, because it's hopefully going to be a once in a lifetime thing that has happened. But the guidance or narrative that has come out from the government in particular has been very clear that actually disclaimed opinions, they shouldn't, all bodies should not be unfairly judged if they've received a disclaimed opinion due to this situation. It would be different if it was something to do with how the council has operated and the opinion was there, but there is some narrative out there that potentially could help. I would also make the point that actually it isn't just EY and it isn't just this council that is in this position. It was as an audit profession that it has arisen. It wasn't just EY, as I say, and it's not just this council that is in this position as well. So there is probably some narrative that you could potentially use that is at a higher level to distill that information down to a local level.
I mean, that's very reassuring, Karen, thank you. But I know what the response will be from Honeybourne, and that is that just proves they're all in it together. I can write the response now. Yeah, it's all broken. Nobody knows what they're doing. On they go. Right, so thank you very much indeed, Karen, for coming and laying that out. I mean, I thought clearly a measured way. So if we have considered and we duly note the draft external audit plan, and we look forward to seeing you later on in the year. Dates of future meetings, 26th of September. The Vice Chairman says he's going to be away.
Yep. Sorry about that. I should be in Australia.
Okay, well...
I'm not popping back for the afternoon.
That's fair enough. I hope you enjoy it. And if you see my wife's cousin, send her my regards. And the 21st of November, you'll be back from Australia? Good. Okay. So thank you very much indeed. I declare the meeting closed. My watch is slow, but 3:10.